There's a moment in life that almost nobody prepares you for. It's the moment when you realize that chasing answers is exhausting. And strangely, silence begins to feel stronger than words. Not the kind of silence that comes from hurt, not the silence that waits for a message that never comes, but the kind of silence that comes from clarity. Because here's the truth most people discover far too late. The most powerful shift in your life does not happen when someone finally understands you. It happens when you stop needing them to. And when that shift happens, something unexpected follows. The energy you once spent trying to be chosen begins returning to you. And suddenly the entire dynamic changes. Most people think power in relationships comes from communication, from explaining, from sending that one message that finally makes the other person understand what they lost. But the strange reality is that the more you explain yourself to someone who is uncertain about you, the less they actually hear. Because people rarely value what they never risk losing. And as long as you remain available, emotionally, mentally, and energetically, there is no urgency to recognize your worth. You become part of the background, a constant, a presence so reliable that it begins to feel permanent. But nothing shifts perception faster than absence. There is a quiet moment when someone who took you for granted notices something unusual. The routine they relied on has changed. The attention they expected is no longer there. The energy they assumed was endless has suddenly stopped. At first, they may not even recognize what's happening. Humans are creatures of habit. When a pattern disappears, the mind doesn't immediately understand it. Instead, it searches for explanations. Maybe you're busy, maybe you're distracted, maybe you'll reach out tomorrow. But tomorrow comes, and the silence remains. And that's when the mind begins to ask a question it never had to ask before. What changed? Here's something fascinating about human psychology. We rarely appreciate the value of something while it is consistently available. Availability creates comfort, but comfort also creates blindness. When someone knows they can always access your attention, they stop noticing its significance. But remove that access, and suddenly the same presence that once felt ordinary begins to feel rare. The shift isn't dramatic, it's subtle. But subtle shifts often carry the greatest weight, because silence has a way of amplifying everything that words once masked. The philosopher Carl Jung once said something that reveals a deep truth about human behavior. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Most people live their relationships unconsciously. They chase approval without realizing it. They overextend emotionally without questioning why. They accept inconsistency because they fear losing connection. And slowly, without noticing, they begin to orbit someone else's attention. But the moment you become aware of this pattern, everything changes. Because awareness creates choice, and choice creates freedom. There is a quiet turning point when someone decides that they will no longer compete for attention that should have been freely given. No announcement, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet withdrawal of energy. And that withdrawal is where transformation begins. Not for the other person, for you. Because every moment you stop seeking validation from someone who cannot provide it, you reclaim a piece of your own identity. At first, it feels unfamiliar. You might reach for your phone out of habit. You might wonder if you should say something, explain something, clarify something. But slowly a new rhythm begins to emerge. A rhythm where your life is no longer measured by someone else's responses. Something interesting happens during this phase. Your attention begins to shift. Instead of analyzing conversations that already happened, you begin creating new experiences. Instead of waiting for emotional reassurance, you begin building emotional stability. Instead of chasing someone else's recognition, you begin recognizing yourself. And the more you invest in your own life, the more something remarkable occurs. Your presence becomes stronger, even in absence. People often misunderstand silence. They think it is passive. But intentional silence is one of the most powerful forms of action. because it forces reality to reveal itself without interference. When you stop chasing someone's attention, two things become possible. Either they step forward or they step away. But in both cases, the truth becomes visible. And truth, even when painful, is always more valuable than confusion. Meanwhile, something else is happening in the background. The person who once relied on your constant attention begins to notice the change. Not immediately, but gradually. The small messages that once appeared throughout their day are gone. The reassurance they once received without asking is gone. The emotional safety net they never acknowledged is gone. And humans are incredibly sensitive to missing patterns. When something disappears from our routine, the mind begins searching for its absence. This is where reflection begins. Reflection is uncomfortable, because reflection forces us to confront our own behavior. Suddenly, the conversations that once felt ordinary begin to carry new meaning. Moments that seemed insignificant now feel important. And questions begin forming that were never asked before. Did I appreciate her enough? Did I assume she would always be there? Did I miss something valuable without realizing it? These questions do not arise because someone manipulated the situation. They arise because absence reveals contrast. Contrast is one of the most powerful psychological forces in existence. You rarely understand the warmth of sunlight until you experience cold. You rarely value peace until you encounter chaos. And you rarely recognize someone's presence until it is no longer part of your daily life. But here is the critical difference. True growth does not come from hoping someone notices your absence. It comes from realizing that your life must move forward regardless of whether they do. Because waiting, even silently, is still waiting. Walking forward is something entirely different. Walking forward means reclaiming the energy that once revolved around uncertainty. It means filling your life with movement again. New experiences, new goals, new laughter. And the more your life expands, the less space remains for someone who could only offer hesitation. This is the part many people misunderstand. The transformation is not about becoming distant. It is about becoming whole. And when someone becomes whole, their presence changes. Confidence that comes from external validation is fragile. But confidence that comes from self-respect is immovable. You no longer feel the urge to prove your value. You no longer feel the need to argue for your worth. You simply exist with the quiet certainty that your time, attention, and emotional investment are meaningful. And meaningful things are never given carelessly. Eventually, the person who once assumed your presence might begin to notice something else. You are not just silent. You are thriving. Your life is moving. Your energy feels different. Your attention is directed toward your own world instead of theirs. And this is where a powerful psychological shift occurs. Because when someone realizes they no longer occupy the center of your life, curiosity replaces complacency. Suddenly they begin observing. Not because you demanded attention, but because your absence created space for awareness. Yet here is the most important truth in this entire story. Your growth must never depend on whether they notice. Because the moment your peace becomes dependent on their realization, you are still orbiting them. Real freedom comes when your life continues expanding without waiting for acknowledgement. When your happiness no longer pauses for someone else's indecision. When your attention belongs to your future instead of your past. That is when your energy becomes magnetic. People are drawn to those who live with purpose. Not because they are trying to impress anyone, but because authenticity carries a quiet strength. It doesn't demand attention. It naturally attracts it. When someone builds a life rooted in self-respect, growth, and clarity, they become unforgettable. Not because they tried to be, but because genuine presence leaves a lasting impression. And that is the paradox most people miss. The moment you stop trying to make someone realize your worth is often the moment your worth becomes most visible. But by then, something important has already changed. You are no longer waiting. You are living. Your mornings begin with intention. Your nights end with peace. Your thoughts revolve around possibilities instead of uncertainties. And your life becomes something far more powerful than a message ever could be. It becomes evidence. Evidence that you no longer need permission to move forward. In the end, silence was never the real power. Clarity was. Clarity about your value. Clarity about your boundaries. Clarity about the life you are willing to accept. Because once you understand that your presence is a privilege, not an obligation, everything changes. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop shrinking your expectations. You stop offering unlimited patience to limited effort. And the moment you choose that path, something remarkable happens. You become impossible to overlook. Not because you demanded recognition, but because you finally recognized yourself.